everyone see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into it. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our Nectar AI webinar with some folks from UNLV and UNM. We've got Ashlee and Michelle here. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and do some quick intros just before we get started. So, you've got me, the co founder and CEO here at Nectar, and joining us from our team, we've got Chloe, our Director of Academic Success. Hey, Chloe. And Ashlee, Michelle, you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'll start. Hi, everyone. I am Ashlee Frandell, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in the School of Public Policy and Leadership. So I do a lot of work on um, research methods and then additionally on how technology use can affect government. So really focusing on public sector technology use, including AI. And uh, along with Michelle Allgood, we co-designed a course together for our students. It's the first one of its kind. It's AI use in the public sector. Neither one of our schools have really kind of had that kind of course before. And in doing so, we were able to um, join in and work with Nectar, which we got for through a grant. And then I'll let Michelle introduce herself.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Allgood. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Public Administration here at the University of New Mexico. Ashlee and I have known each other. We went to Arizona State together and did our PhDs there. And so we do a lot of research together. She's a specialist in like e-government and science policy, and I do a lot of work on accessibility and social equity, and then public management and employee well-being. And so we'll kind of talk about how this class started, but it really our choice to co-design and teach at two locations and kind of two separate modalities. I taught in person and Ashlee taught asynchronously over Canvas. Really came from that collaboration that started kind of Arizona State. So, and I was able to get Nectar through that same grant because we wanted to see what it looked like in person versus asynchronous. So.
Amazing. Perfect. Thanks, guys. That was a great overview. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. We'll go through a little bit of today's agenda so you know what to expect. So first we'll talk about, your motivations for actually integrating AI into your classroom, and then how did that actually look? What was it like doing the integration? How is it implementing it into your existing coursework? And then what was the impact on students from that? What was the success that you found in the classroom? What were, some of the things that students struggled with when adopting AI? And based on how everything went, what are your goals for the future and how you want to continue to implement initiatives with AI across not just your classroom, but the department itself? And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A as well. So on that Q&A note, for everyone who is in our webinar today, you can go ahead and use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions that you have. And either someone from the Nectar team will get back to you in real time, or if it's a great question, we'll actually ask that out loud. And so Chloe will help us with that. And as we're going through the slides, we'll ask questions to Michelle and Ashlee from the audience. So please feel free to put all of your questions in there. There is no question too small or too big. We love to hear what you're curious about. So just to show you how to go ahead and leave your questions throughout. And then also we have some time, like I said, at the end for Q&A if we want to get into some really deep questions. So I'll let Chloe figure out when we want to ask questions where. But let's go ahead and jump straight into it. So, Ashlee and Michelle, I'm going to pass this back over to you guys. You let me know when we want to get to the next slide. But we're just going to start off with what was the initial goal that you had, and what was the motivation for implementing AI in the classroom, but in particular, Nectar AI as well?
Yeah, so I can start off. So Michelle and I, as she was saying, we kind of co-designed this course together and we got it through a grant from UNLV, my university. And as part of this grant, it also was a research project, or is a continuing research project, where we're looking at how the use of AI and in our particular ways can kind of support our students and prepare them for workforce changes. So we're all very aware that AI is now kind of a lot more common. It's popping up everywhere. And a big part of that is also coming into the public sector. And the public sector has certain kind of rules and needs that are going to be different from private use.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, our students are kind of at this kind of chokehold, this turning point where they need to understand appropriate uses and also feel more comfortable kind of with this new technology change.
Right.
And I'd add the impetus for this course really started as everything great does at a conference where Ashlee and I were sitting talking about things that we were doing in our classes right then, talking about some of the challenges we were facing. And you know, it wasn't just us, there were a lot of people around us having those conversations as well. And we realized that we wanted our students to feel like they had the skill set to evaluate a technology that changes daily, right? That and then the needs of their department changes daily, and to view it as a resource to meet their job demands, but also knowing that it is something that is so new, and we need to kind of balance that. And so we spent a lot of time as we developed this course over the summer thinking about how do we encourage this critical analysis and not treat it as, oh, this is the shiny new toy, everybody wants it, but where is a right place for this, right? There's a lot of great opportunities that AI presents, but there's lots of costs that have to be considered, especially with public service. You don't have a ton of resources. Where do you spend your money? Where do you spend your time and your training? And so those are all things that we felt were really important for our students to be aware of and really influence the design of this course.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh,
All right.
Ashlee, I don't know if you wanted to mention something about why Nectar. We also talked about this particular platform because we felt the FERPA compliance was incredibly high. You'll hear throughout the panel, our students are very concerned about their data privacy, just as we are. And so I think that was one of the most positive aspects, like as we were looking for what tools could we use and how could we help design this course, we really looked for that.
Yes, and like Michelle said, the FERPA compliance was a really big deal, something where we could feel secure. And then another kind of really cool aspect of Nectar is the relationship, the two-way relationship that we've developed now with, you know, our liaison, Chloe, and then the, you know, organization in general. So through this relationship, we have support when we kind of are trying to learn more about this AI program and the different needs and how it will fit with our students. There is a bit of a learning curve in understanding how to best fit these different bots and assistants with our courses. And so we did have, you know, Chloe working with us to help design these different assistants that we used, brainstorming, and then also allowed for a lot of personalization. So our course was very specific to the public sector needs. And so, you know, some of our assistants and things that we created were going to be different than maybe the average use. And it also allowed for a lot of kind of quick adjustments and feedback. So we were able to tell, you know, the teams what we would like, what we're looking for, and they really were responsive and happy to kind of work with us on getting or achieving our goals.
And I think now let's hop straight into the actual implementation of that because I'm very curious to hear for you guys specifically, you had students actually use Nectar AI to create their own assistants, and that's very different than any other use case that we've seen. It's typically instructors who are going in and putting, you know, their textbook, their assignments, their syllabus, and creating, you know, a course assistant or a role play partner, a salary negotiation assistant. But it's usually one assistant they create, and all of the students use it themselves. Whereas you guys had a very different approach, which is really hands-on. You know, you're going to be the ones creating your own AI assistants and training it on your own data. So would love to hear about how was it actually implemented in your classroom and how did that go?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we did kind of take two approaches to implementation. One is the kind of more instructor-driven aspects, and then more student-driven aspects. So for the instructor-driven aspects, we, Michelle and I developed our own AI assistants for different assignment elements where our students could use them for things like professional development. We had assistants that helped with creating their CVs, which helped with, you know, interview practice, different kind of assignments like that, where our students could look and see how we created these different assistants, what were their positive elements, what were their maybe more negative elements. And then we also had our students look at multiple different types of AI. So not just Nectar, but all that's available and kind of thinking about what are the privacy elements to be concerned about? Is this actually appropriate to use? So that was our first step. The second step is then more student driven, where our students actually created their own AI assignment deliverables. Like they made their own assistants for whatever use they determined was most appropriate. So the assignment asked for them to create their own assistants based off of organizational needs. So that could be a current place where they're working, a place they would like to work in the future. And then what we did is lots of iterations. So that was what I think is really key with our student-driven aspects is they created their own assistants and then their classmates went in and evaluated, tried to work with the assistants and see what it was like. Then they went back and did more iterations. So that was really kind of a cool thing for them to do to kind of understand how much actually goes into creating these assistants and how can we make them more successful.
I would add to that we spent a lot of time being very deliberate in this iteration process because we recognize it's a really key teaching tool. It's not just a peer evaluation, but teaching students how to provide feedback, like what is useful. We had very specific writing assignments, reflective writing assignments, where students were not only asked to evaluate the feedback they got, right? So we can help them parse, well, maybe this was helpful because this person's coming in and has no knowledge of the organization that they're supposed to be interacting with. But also to evaluate what they changed and why. And so throughout the semester, I mean, when they first started, the assistants were very, very, very basic, very weighty, right? They were trying to make it do everything for a problem. And then as they were prompted to reflect on like, well, why did you make that choice? Why did you use these learning materials to train your model? They really realized the importance of creating this a place for the AI as a tool in the organization. And so something that we learned that I think we'll be implementing in future iterations of this course is actually having to sit down and kind of write it out by hand first. Like, what are you looking for? Where does this fit in your organization? What is the experience you want a user to have, and process map that out for them before they develop. I mean, it was helpful to throw them in the deep end because we saw some really cool stuff, I think, but that was really hard for them. And so we tried to demo this for them multiple times. We also created using the Gemini prompt creation guide, an assistant for them to interact with an AI to say like, hey, I want to write a better prompt. Here's what I currently have. How can I do that? So they had multiple ways to improve their own assistant over time.
And I'm curious, do you guys have any examples of some of the most interesting assistants that students created that you just were like, wow, that's fascinating. I didn't even think about that, or ones that even they found the most useful?
Yeah.
I can start. I would say my students, so some of them use them for their current organizations, but what I thought was really cool is some of them actually created them for our own School of Public Policy and Leadership, recognizing that, you know, there could be better interaction with students and also kind of helping both prospective and current students kind of have more interaction and preparation for the workforce, which is something that this whole course was designed to think about. And so just having our students actually also really kind of focus on this and try to improve it was really cool to see.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think on my end, I had students really looking at the gaps in service that they can provide and seeing where they're spending the most time in these repetitive processes where they can maybe present like a first bridge option for the users to interact with this AI. And then if they need additional help, they're primed to get that help, and the caseworkers, whatever, can work with them. So we had one student who works for the library system, developed this little chatbot with lots of prompts to help people come in and say, like, I want directions to the nearest food pantry, or I want directions to a domestic violence shelter, or how do I do this? And because a lot of libraries are now functioning in this social work capacity. And so that takes the onus off of the librarian to have that initial conversation, but they can then see what resources they might need to bring to this person, right? If they're willing to. And she actually got the AI to start including bus directions, like what bus
Oh,
do you
that's
take,
awesome.
how far it's going to be. That was really cool. And I think the other one that really stood out to me was somebody who was working with the Indigenous Missing and Murdered Women Project Task Force here in New Mexico. And something that a lot of families face is they have to manage this case over months, weeks, years,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be very burdensome. And there's always, updates and changes, and how do you manage it? And so she really worked to train this AI to be that like a guide, right? Like, how do you post on social media? How do you avoid scams, people sharing false
Mm-hmm.
information? What questions should you be bringing to the detectives, or what
Mm-hmm.
should be posting to increase awareness? And I think that was such an innovative tool, because she
Yeah.
was able to see a need. We have such a big problem with that in our country, especially here in New Mexico, and find a
Mm-hmm.
way to resolve that.
That's really incredible. I think that's the coolest part about seeing students be able to utilize AI is they have so many different ideas of how this can be used to fix things in their daily life that before this we didn't have a solution for. And now you can take AI and customize it to quite literally whatever you need it to do. And that is to date one of the coolest examples I've ever heard. That is really, really awesome that they were able to create this source of truth for families that are already going through something that's so difficult. You don't have the mental capacity to think about how to do that. So let AI take that off of your plate.
Yep.
That's
Really.
awesome. Oh, very cool. All right. So now let's talk, we're already talking about the success stories, but from your classes, we've heard some really great success stories from the individual students of after just one term, how were they prepared to go into the workforce, the jobs that they got from it. So would love to hear from both of you the highlights of using Nectar AI in your class and what you think you and your students got from it.
Yeah, so I can start. So my students were a little bit kind of a different population than Michelle's. Most of mine were actually at the end of their MPA program, their Masters of Public Administration program. And
Mm-hmm.
so they were getting ready for the workforce. And with that, we really did have some cool success stories. I had one student get offered a job in AI, kind of an AI focused role. Prior to starting this course, he did disclose that he had no prior experience working with AI. And so just the idea that was able to kind of gain these new skills and also promote himself as having these skills and what now he could do with AI. This new job role was also still in the public sector, and so very fitting with, what the student learned.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, I have many students who are working while going to school. That's very common in our program. And so they actually disclose a lot of their uses of AI in their current roles as they kind of started getting more comfortable with AI. And not just using AI, but also informing and kind of working with management on AI, different kind of policy implementation. So yes, AI can be really great and there's lots of benefits, but there also should be hesitations, right?
Mm-hmm.
AI does not work for everything. And there are lots of concerns with privacy, confidentiality, other kind of transparency, making sure the public knows when it's being used. And so they really felt comfortable, discussing that with management and maybe helping others in their programs and their jobs kind of better understand this, which was a very
Mm-hmm.
cool kind of outcome.
That is awesome. It's really cool to hear.
Yeah. And like Ashlee, a lot of my students are working professionals, but unlike Ashlee, they were kind of midpoint in the program. They're taking some of the electives to fulfill their graduation requirements. And so with that, it was I think a little bit of a different tenor, because they could I felt like a lot more exploration, right? Like doing it a little bit earlier, where they had some mastery of what public service is, what are the requirements, thinking about data, already have some of that literacy skills. And then now I have these students again in classes now, where they show an increased knowledge of not just AI, right, but the idea of bringing technology into public service in general, and just some of the
Mm.
questions that they're asking, and thinking about who benefits. But they spend a lot of time talking about the impact on community members and clients, but also inside the organization. Like, is this going to replace somebody's role? And if so, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like, in some cases, it might be great. You can free that person up to focus on other things. But if you live in a rural town and you're using this money to pay for an AI system, that probably is going to take the spot of somebody else in the community. And so
Mm.
is that worth the cost? And if it is, you need to be very clear why.
Mm.
I spent a lot of time thinking through gaps in public service, right? And thinking
Mm-hmm.
about how AI really can help address those gaps. But like Ashlee said, when is it appropriate to use? My students were very, very concerned about data and where it came from and how they were collected, and the idea that we have some bias in how we collect data in the first place. Like that's just natural, right? We all have our own preferences for how things should be coded or what we think is most important. And so that means that the information we're getting is maybe not a fully clear picture. And there's ways for us to control for that in our statistical modeling. But it's not clear how AI is doing that, right? We know it does it, but it's that black box. And so thinking more, our students spend a lot of time talking about the system, right? The process of like, well, where is it getting its data from? What can we do to influence that? So the outcomes are going to be more equitable, that we can be more accountable, because even though we don't know maybe the coding or the analysis that's going on, we know where that came from and we understand the inputs and the outputs over the transformation process.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how did you guys feel about, the overall sentiment from students when they started using AI? Do you feel like majority of students were worried about it or had not used it before, and then, by the end of the class maybe got more comfortable with it, or was it the other way around? What did you see the general pattern being?
I would say almost all of my students had not used AI prior. They
Mm-hmm.
were very hesitant, maybe using AI for, kind of helping with certain writing prompts prior, but not really, really engaging with AI. And so a lot of my students were very hesitant, had lots of questions and kind of worries. And throughout the semester, I did notice they got a lot more comfortable. They were kind of more willing to use AI, not just for the course, but in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think was really important that Michelle and I developed into the course and which stayed with them was some of that hesitation. Even though they
Mm-hmm.
got way more comfortable and were kind of happy to use it when appropriate, they still had that lens of questioning of, is this a good use? Where are the biases? What should I be worried about? And so
Mm-hmm.
they did hold on to that, which I think is really important, especially in the public sector, but in all sectors, to kind of have that questioning attitude towards it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I would jump in. Some of my students, so in the HR class that I teach in the spring, I already had my students working with ChatGPT just to kind of explore some of the HR uses. We would do exploration activities every week. And so I had about half my class coming in having actively used it in a classroom setting for a directed purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they hadn't done the back end. And I think that's where the biggest hesitancy I saw. They didn't understand what went into it, how to build it, how to think about prompts, how to think about training documents. But they felt comfortable on the user side. And I don't think, and Ashlee and I would talk about this every week, like there wasn't necessarily a difference in terms of course quality or student experience having used it as a user. It was the complete lack of knowledge of like, what does it look like on the backside that was more important to train and develop and talk about the accountability side of it.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the most interesting parts of this class is that for the first time for a lot of these students, they're seeing what's happening on the back end. They're the ones setting it up. They're seeing where the data goes and how it's able to pull from that data set. And especially with Nectar AI being able to choose, is it general knowledge, topic knowledge, or document only, seeing how you can adjust that. I think that is what we were starting to realize really, really important for students to be able to see the front end and the back end, just to, like you said, Ashlee, even go forward knowing here's the things that I should be looking carefully into when I'm using AI anywhere, even outside of education and especially in the workforce. What are the different things that I should be measuring for, and what should I be worried about that, is a very realistic worry to have. So I think this you guys did an awesome job teaching that in this class, and now is something that we say as a best practice is don't just create your own assistants for your students, have them actually see what's going into the back end and give them an opportunity to create those as well.
Yep, definitely.
Awesome. So now let's get into, the overall key takeaways from this and what you would say are the best practices. So for the faculty that are here with us today and are going to watch this recording, what would you want them to know about their first time implementing AI in the classroom and what they can use as a best practice?
So I can start again, and Michelle will give more details about starting with theory as like a very important kind of first step. I will talk a little bit more about kind of this idea of how complex AIs can be and embracing this and letting students kind of really take their time with going through all these iterations and being able to develop skills kind of case by case basis. So Michelle and I did spend a lot of time kind of thinking through how we were going to start this course. So starting with a lot of theory, a lot of understanding of how the AI tools work, what are credible sources, what is truth, how should our students really kind of embrace this. And then they were introduced to, the different assistants that Michelle and I made. And then they went into kind of creating their own and doing lots of iterations. So patience is really, really key here. As instructors, we already know this, right? We have to be really patient with our students. I think even more so here, just letting our students kind of falter a little bit. And, they had lots of questions even about our own assistants of, why didn't we do this? Why is this not happening? And that was honestly purposeful. We wanted them to kind of see potential, but also see pitfalls and kind of question what we were doing. And so that was really cool. I would say even as we were kind of creating this course, Michelle and I were also flexible with the content and making changes. Because my course was online, it was a little bit easier to, as I was going along, make changes to their different assignments. So I actually had the students kind of do a lot of peer evaluations where, their peers would give them feedback on different kind of case studies that they were doing. Towards the end, I actually implemented a final evaluation to be through the AI assistant rather than their peers. That way they could even compare, when you need that peer evaluation, that human interaction, and when actually the AI can help with certain kind of aspects of what they were creating. So learning to balance that, AI does not replace, their peer evaluations, their human interactions, but it can supplement and kind of help it be more focused in certain areas where they need kind of more of that assistant.
Yeah, and I think Ashlee really named that it required a lot of flexibility on our part and on the students' part, and it required a lot of patience. Students were so excited to like dive into AI, and we wouldn't even let them touch it for like 3 weeks. We were like, you're just going to do readings and discussions, you're going to have these conversations. It was really important that we started with the idea of what truth is, how we communicate, what are lenses that we bring to the table through communication. And Ashlee's an expert in those areas. And then I brought in the expertise of thinking about, well, what does accessibility look like? And not just from, individuals with disabilities, but this larger question of accessibility, access, inclusion, data literacy. And so we wanted them to have those terms together, have a common understanding and a common knowledge, because we knew that once they started, some of the theory would start to slip, right? We want to be able to bring it back and name, okay, remember when we were all very depressed on week 2 about like the fact that can be relative, but really isn't at the same time, and we're all stressed about this. You're having that experience reading your peer evaluations, and you're thinking, why can't they get what I'm doing? And you're like, well, that's because they have their own perspectives and how they're interpreting this. And so really trying to give them some of that, emotional intelligence around things that they get really invested in, right? These are their creations, it's their baby. And we want them to be able to think about, how do I collaborate? How do I analyze what stakeholders need? How do I be strategic in deploying tools in the organization? So we really spent a lot of time, we did a lot of reading, a lot of research. We watched a lot of experts in thinking about what in public service is most important as values. And then when we set our learning goals, we were very, very deliberate, knowing that students were going to want to come in and walk away telling everybody, I'm an AI expert. And we really want them to walk away saying, I know the beginnings, right? But I am equipped to continue to develop my expertise. And that really meant that we needed to focus on 1 or 2 essential outcomes. Which, like we said, we talked about how to be a critical evaluator, right? And how to be able to know the best times and places to use AI, because you can always experiment and practice and develop policy around those areas. But you needed to have those skills before, when somebody's like, we should use AI here. Well, you need to know what questions to ask and really pursue that. And I think we talked to our students the very first day, and I remember the discussion with students. I was like, you're going to have lots of questions, and we can answer some of them in this class. Some of them we might not be able to answer. And more importantly, everything is changing. Like every week I would bring up a new article I read and help
Mm,
have that discussion with them of like, you haven't read this article yet, but let me tell you what was covered and what that means for you. Maybe it was just a fire hose. Our students handled that very, very well. But it was challenging. It was a big lift for them to not have the predictability that you see in some of these more established fields. And so
mm,
we really had to prioritize the things we wanted to teach them and implement in every week as we taught.
mm-hmm. And I'm for the faculty that are listening to this, if you could go back to the start and give yourself a piece of advice that you now know, and for faculty who are just starting out implementing AI in their classroom, what is the one thing that you want them to take away from this that they should really know?
So I can go first, Ashley. I think I was not expecting um how reactive my students would be, like emotionally. So I mean, we talk about things that we had to use good examples. We also use bad examples, right? And that can be really hard, especially when you're dealing in public service, like, people's lives are on the line, the decision making, they're very consequential. And so we wanted to I didn't realize how often I would like walk off of the call thinking I just hosted a therapy session and I am not
Mm,
equipped to do that. And so I wish I had spent more time preparing my students to say like, this is going to be like, you don't think you're like, AI is fun. You're like, yes, but we're talking about the behind the scenes work and there's a lot of
mhm,
lifting there. And it's not even controversial topics, but it's thinking about like, how do we power AI? Nuclear power is a big issue here in New Mexico. There are lots of
mm,
consequences and there's lots of personal feelings there. How do we think about data? How do we think about the best implementations for communities that have been typically targeted for, over policing or, underfunded in education. And so that was not something I was expecting. So I think taking that time to think about what are my students emotionally going to go through that I need to be prepared for.
mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. What's the real world implications of AI? And yeah, I hear the same thing. There's a lot of students that are just scared of what does this AI driven future mean? How am I going to fit in this space? How do I carve out a space for myself? And especially when you have this news coming at you 24/7 that the entire world is changing, all these positions are going to change, the job market is going to change. I totally get it. We hear that a lot, that it is a much more emotional experience than what students and teachers are expecting.
Mhm. I would just add also kind of, looking back, understanding that at the beginning, at least, it is kind of a heavy lift as instructors, but also for students, right? To get that kind of initial understanding where then they can ask all these important questions we're talking about, took a lot of reading, took a lot of kind of talking and listening to experts and really kind of getting this general understanding also of how fast things change, like we've been saying, um, you know, even during the course time we had to update things. And so
Mm,
that took a lot on Michelle's and my part, and then also on our students' part, because, this was an elective course, but the high level of reading and, experimentation and different kind of iterations, that took a lot for our students. And towards
mm,
the end, it clicked and it was, very exciting and great that we did all this. But at the beginning, it did take some patience to get our students to kind of buy in and understand why their workload was what it was.
mhm,
And to add to that, I would say this was a top heavy workload. So we were
mm,
deliberate in the design of thinking our students by the end of the course are dealing with finals and other classes, right? They have projects, they have
mhm,
things they're working on. And so we wanted to get and capture their attention up front and give them that language, that knowledge, and then have the last half of the course really be you're in a workspace where you're
mhm,
pulling and implementing this. So the workload was definitely heavier up front and it eased out towards the end where it was just the focus on developing these assistants, getting that feedback, and then
mm.
reiterating again.
Yeah. All right. And now that you've gone through this class and you've taught it once and you know what to do for next time, I would love to hear a little bit more about your future goals for not just implementing Nectar AI, but how you think about AI in all of the courses that you're going to be teaching.
So, our first goal, of course, is to kind of stick with this course that we created and our research project, which is basically understanding, how this helps our students in the workforce, making some revisions to the course, and making sure we kind of have a clear understanding of what that should look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Ashlee and I took away from this is that public servants are not prepared for a world of AI in the
Mm.
best possible way, right? They have so many other things going on. And um, one of the tools that we can use is to provide functional trainings for them. But it cannot be, all right, here's how you write a prompt. Like it needs to, we learned how important it is our class to talk about these concerns and these theories first, to really work through the concepts before we jump into AI. We also know they don't have time, right, to sit down for 16 weeks, and that's a luxury our students were able to take advantage of. And so trying to find a way to highlight the things that were most important to our students, to work through what we found were common themes and elements, to say like, if you only have, 4 hours before you need to start using an AI tool, what are the most important things you as public servants need to know? And that's something that I think we're working on. It's something that would apply to all of our classes too. Like when we're asking you to use AI in the classroom, when we're having those conversations, what are those things that we're saying, you can't use it in this context, but here are the reasons why. We're not just being arbitrary, right? So that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say going forward, I'm in a slightly different position than Michelle. My department is actually fully involved in this AI project with you guys with Nectar. So the grant came through my university and it's for multiple years. So we're kind of doing a slow roll process where we start with our students kind of getting this AI use in public sector course. And then from there, we're now implementing the use of Nectar in multiple courses. So I myself, I teach research methods, and I am now using Nectar in my course. The students already are kind of, interacting with Nectar, and that course is a little bit more straightforward use of AI, especially for any of the kind of analytic assignments.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I am working with other faculty for integrating Nectar into their courses when appropriate. So I'm talking at faculty meetings. I'm working with certain faculty that are really interested. Chloe as well is working with them and lots of help. And it's really comes down to one is instructor buy-in that they would like to kind of implement this into their courses. It's not mandatory. It's up to whoever would like it, but also where it best fits. And that's something that, I talk to them about, they talk to Chloe about, they kind of really think through. So for this kind of course integration into the larger department, we're making sure we're doing it slowly. We're kind of taking our time and thinking about, best fits. We're also really thinking about workforce development, professional
Mm-hmm.
development. So how can we use Nectar to really supplement that? We are, an MBA program with required courses and a lot of work that our students do. And so that does limit kind of their help for professional development. And so that is an area that we've seen that Nectar can really kind of supplement and give our students more opportunities than just the professors on their own. So
Mm-hmm.
really kind of understanding that larger picture of how Nectar can fit in with our department, and who's interested, right? There
Yeah.
needs to be buy-in on all levels.
I
Mm-hmm.
also say from a standpoint of a faculty member, AI can be really useful as a resource for you. So how I really got into even thinking about AI in the first place in my classes is I wanted to run a semester-long simulation in my HR class, and I came up with the idea week 2, and I wanted to kick it off in week 4, and I was like, this is a lot of work, because I wanted to have not only a profile, but I wanted to have, in this HR course, like job descriptions they could use, or, previous workplace safety plans. And I don't have the time to sit down and generate that. And more importantly, I needed them to be obviously flawed in some ways and not obviously flawed in other ways. And so like that just takes a lot of work, a lot of mindset. I ended up using AI to help me do that, right? And then I was able to go through and edit it and make it fit with what I was going for. But now I see it as a supplementation for my students when they're going through and we're having the simulation activity and these discussions. They can engage with an AI trained on these materials that understands, right, how everything goes along, and really engages with questions they can ask in the future. And then I can point them to more deeper learning, right? They see the obvious flaws, great, but did you catch the things I wanted to highlight as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would add on to what Michelle said, which was a really good point, which is it's not just for student use.
Hmm.
As instructors, we have it can help a lot with design and kind of coming up with new ideas.
Hmm.
Additionally, I actually was fortunate that one of my graduate assistants also took my course of AI use in the public sector. And so she was had a high buy-in and really interested. And so
Hmm.
I had two graduate assistants this last semester. One used AI to help with her graduate assistant work for me, some data collection, some kind of better understanding by using AI. And the other one didn't because it wasn't as appropriate. So kind of thinking through that and, when it's appropriate, I worked with my GA and we kind of were able to um, create an assistance that helped her with her data collection, with helped her with kind of thinking through our larger project. And again,
Hmm.
it wasn't a fit for my other graduate assistant, and that was fine. Just kind of thinking through that and making the choice there.
Yep.
Right. Absolutely. Figuring out where it actually works best at first and then allowing that to set a good example for other folks. Because I think over the next year or two, we're going to just keep finding new ways to implement AI across the campus. Like you said, be it for student use or specifically for instructor use. I think there's so many opportunities that we're going to uncover, but it is really figuring out where does it fit best at first so that we can have that early success and show folks here's what it does look like when it's used in the right way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, that was incredible. I'm so appreciative for you guys actually walking us through how you implemented AI in the classroom and what the best practices were. And for faculty who are just getting started with this, how can they start to think about implementing AI, not just for themselves, but for their students? So I want to open it up to any Q&A, any good questions that we got from the audience. I know, Chloe, you and I had some questions that we put together as well. So anything that we're hearing that we want to answer out loud.
So we did have a question from one of our participants asking about Nectar in contrast to other tools like Notebook, Google Notebook, and Hub. Let me pull up the question just so I make sure I use the right terminology. Poe AI and Hugging Face.
So I can speak to the notebook because I'm personally using that. I will say that what we had our students experiment with when we had them compare across different GPTs is we had them look at ChatGPT, Gemini, and Copilot. And the reason being is most public service organizations are going to have a Google account or a Microsoft account, right?
Hmm.
And then ChatGPT is a very well-known tool. And so those are things that if their vendors are looking, those are the first things they're going to go to, especially in public service. They are very hesitant to try unknowns, right? We don't want to get into those contracting problems. And so that being said, I'm using Google Notebook for some of my research just to try it out so I can talk to my students about it. And I would say Nectar AI is much it's just there's a broader range of applications because the notebook is focused on maybe one particular topic. And it's drawing from resources that you give it, but you have to be very deliberate in adding those consistently. Where
Mm.
when we would ask our students to create these assistants, they would. I mean, we had one person just download the entire housing manual for affordable housing and put that in, and then we use the general knowledge functions that's also
Mm.
available as part of Nectar. And so it was less of a lift for them to go through and think, okay, what are these smaller sources I might need to put in? They could, put in these larger documents. So that was really useful. I don't know, Ashley, if you want to talk about the other ones that we used.
Yeah, so I actually had some of my students kind of talk about a few of them did use some of the different AI products in their jobs already. And so some of it they actually preferred, outside use to Nectar, which was a little bit what they said kind of more timely, a quicker kind of finding. However, they also said that Nectar had kind of more reliable results with things.
Mm.
And so they themselves were very torn about, which one to use and when, because they did have access to Nectar all semester. I did have one student say that she wanted to, recommend using Nectar, which again, like Michelle said, in the public sector, that's a bit harder of a lift. I will also say Nectar for instructor purposes also has kind of analytics where
Yes.
instructors can look and see, what are our students doing and really follow with things, which is again part of that two-way relationship, which as an instructor was really, really cool. Which again is a little different as, a user versus creator. So depends on need.
Yeah. And I'd also like to add the compliance of FERPA was the best part.
Yeah.
Because when we did this comparison activity, we wrote out prompts and specifically hidden ways so their data wouldn't necessarily be collected and used in training models. Just focusing on like a generic question that you ask, then you duplicate across 3 sites, where they could then ask very specific questions that were related to their workplaces or to our assignments, and know that their data was secure, and that a lot of my students were hesitant to use AI in the first place. That allowed them to feel comfortable engaging at all.
Absolutely. I think that's very common with what we hear is analytics to be able to see what your students are doing and how they're engaging with it, and then FERPA compliance to know that your proprietary data is safe, it's not being used to train the model. You can be a lot more free in your conversations with AI inside of Nectar because you know it's staying right there inside of Nectar and not going anywhere else. Awesome. Chloe, anything else for we have from the audience? Okay, awesome. Any questions from our team that we want to cover that we hadn't during the presentation? We got through all of it? All right. We're efficient people. I love it. That was great. All right. Well, I am so appreciative once again of you guys being here with us for this webinar. It's really great to be able to hear the success that you've had with Nectar AI in your classroom, and also really to see the success of your students in using these technologies. I think, again, I keep going back to the fact that you had one of your students who came in with no AI experience whatsoever and left the class with a job in AI. That is just so awesome to me. And to see that you guys were able to implement Nectar AI quickly and safely and efficiently for your students, and to have them get this much value out of it, that's exactly what we're looking for and why we built this product in the first place. So really looking forward to continuing to build with you and seeing how you use this in your future classes. And thank you to everyone for joining us today for this webinar. And if you're watching this recording, thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this. If you have any questions, please feel free to connect with Michelle and Ashlee. If you guys want to go ahead and put any contact information into the chat, we'll also share this when we post this on our YouTube channel as well. You can also connect with the Nectar team and get a demo for your department, your classroom, or your campus. Or you can also connect with us on our LinkedIn, and that's where we share, these webinars as we host them. We'll share the recordings there as well for you to share with your teams and communities. So please go ahead and connect with us in our Nectar community on LinkedIn. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Ashlee and Michelle, for the time today. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will all see you in the next one. Thanks, guys. Bye, everyone.